Hello, Joy. Good to see you back playing again. Lots to be proud of. Although the footage you've sent me, I think you probably are already aware that maybe we don't quite see the start of your swing. But I think posture, the spine angle here, always nice to see. Good lines in that respect. Great to see your left arm and the shaft of the club pointing back towards the target. It was nice to see a little bit of angle to the club face there. Just the club face sort of rotates open too much. Don't really like to see that, especially if you're complaining of a slice. More about that in a moment, but I think your balance looks pretty good. And halfway back, things look pretty good. Actually, incidentally, it's still feasible with this piece of footage, even though we don't see the starting point of your swing. If we take a line, you've seen me do this before, and we draw it right through the center of your upper sternum. So right through that sort of central point. I hope the software here just tidies up my circle, but you get the idea, that will do. So there's a central point that's sort of straight down through the top of your head and midway between your shoulders. So technically, if we sort of took that and that line, where those lines intersect or where they cross over, there's a central point there that more or less we would do well, any golfer would do well to keep that in the same place. We don't see you gain height. There we are. You measure your height against the background. We don't see you gain height excessively. The camera is moving a little bit here, so that isn't ideal either. But I think maybe you had somebody kindly holding the camera for you. Thank them. But try and keep the camera a little bit stiller if you can. Or what you can do is you can hold a golf club and you can sit the phone on the top of the golf club, and that can kind of act as a stabilizing influence and just keep the camera a little bit steadier, because it's really important we keep the camera as steady as possible when we do this in a perfect world. But I'm not complaining too much, at least I get to see you. So your hands arrive almost perfectly on plane. You can see there the butt of the club, the mass of the club, sitting on that line that we're trying to swing the club along. Sadly, upon reflection, it's drawing a line against your head with the cameras moving up quite significantly. Probably doesn't help matters. So we'll have to just kind of review that another time. But I don't honestly see against the background. If you look at your head against the back of the range there, we'll just take you back a little bit. You can see your head isn't gaining height significantly. It's not really losing any height either. So that's always a good thing. Now, at this point, knowing that the club is on plane, I think if we go further through the footage, your club here, you see the way the shaft wants to join with this yellow line. It may be delivered slightly above the plane, but again, it does depend on exactly how fussy you are about that. You can see the club hugging that yellow line all the way back and all the way through. All right, a little bit above, but I think, rejoining it and staying pretty much on it. There's maybe a shout here or a suggestion that we could be delivering the club a little bit from above. We could maybe have it a bit more behind. You can see here my main complaint would be that your right arm is very straight when you hit the ball, but we can't complain about your body rotation. So certainly your hip rotation. I think we might like to see your chest pointing a little bit more towards the ball at impact and the club a little bit more on your right, but that's something I'll prefer to address slightly separately. At the moment, I think your swing path is decent, and I think we ought to probably leave it a little bit alone, because it's certainly not destructive. But my bigger concern, and this is really the point I want to make with this particular session, I'm just going to delete those lines. This angle here, so you can see I'm highlighting in the back of your left wrist. Now, the industry calls that cupped, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail when I demonstrate in front of camera for you. Now, if you look at the angle of the club face and the angle of the back of your left arm, they're fairly similar. So it's not outrageous, but because you've been, I wouldn't say struggling, but because you've been saying that your ball flight tends to slice, one thing we do know is your club face is open or pointing to the right toward, at the moment of impact, which sends the ball to the right and will tend, when you add force and you hit longer clubs like a driver, it will tend to make the ball curve more violently as you add more force. So it sort of seems to not be happening with your short clubs, but then it will show itself with your longer clubs. So I think that's one thing to consider. But the angle there in the back of your left wrist, again, the industry calls this cupped. That cupped angle, I'm going to explain that in front of camera. I don't think the information I have for you will come across quite as easily if I try to explain it on this part of the video. So I'm going to do that in a second when I go outside. So I'll explain what I want you to do and how we're going to move forwards quite literally then. So we're going to change that angle. I'm going to talk to you about why and what the motivation for doing it is. It might not be something that comes easily to you. It might take work. It might be something that you feel very uncomfortable with. But I think only by doing something a little bit different for a little while will you be able to take a view on whether you like it or whether you don't. But what I will do before I go outside is I'm going to show you a famous male golfer who exhibits a very, very strong sort of opposite trait to what you're what we're seeing here with your swing. I'm going to show you that in contrast, and then when I reference it, when I'm outside showing you the demonstration, you'll know to be able to rewind this footage and look back in this part of the video coming up, and you can reference it when I mention it later on. Okay, just before I do show you that male golfer who exhibits that particular trait, we're going to look at your swing from in front. Okay, Joy, and again here, your swing starts, we're a little into your swing already, but really good here. We see sort of half your upper body rotation has been made. Your right arm appears slightly above your left, which you'd want to see at this point in the backswing, really. You know, your weight distribution looks very even at this point. You look very stable. Really like to see your chest pointing sort of horizontally or down, even slightly down towards the ground at this point. Really good look of stability in your backswing. I think that there's not a lot that I would hurry you to change in that respect. What I really like about the way you perform your backswing is you sort of stay in the same place. Really, just solid rotation. All right, and as you start forwards, looking really good. The sequencing is decent. I did mention already that your right arm gets a little bit long now. What I want to highlight here is just in this forward part of your swing where we kind of see the club doesn't really overtake your hands. If you look from here on out, your hands and the club are moving at about the same speed. Now that's a suggestion to me that you're preventing from the club from releasing, from forward rotating, and I'm going to explain that in the video as well. But it's eventually you let the club go, but I think if you were letting that club head freewheel, as I'll call it, if you were letting your lead arm, your left arm rotate properly and smoothly and freely, what that would do is that would assist you in getting club speed, and that would give you more ball speed if we can obviously make a good strike, which is obviously part of the game. But also it would allow the club to rotate, and again I'll explain that in front of camera. But it would allow the club to rotate more freely, and that would increase the rate of closure of the club, and it would reduce the propensity to leave the club face a little bit open. And that's what assists your slice. So letting the club head freewheel a little bit more, and I'll show you something in a second on that, is going to reduce the tendency to slice and also increase club speed, which could increase distance quite happily as well. So quite a lot of bang for your buck with that one. Anyway, that's going to be something I come back to outside. So those 2 points I will touch on outside. For now, I'm just going to show you a guy by the name of Collin Morikawa. He's an American golfer. And I'm going to show you a trait in his swing and a tendency that I think we might do well to copy. So here's Collin. Now, pay attention to his left hand and his left wrist. Now, I'm going to set this footage in motion, and you can see it's very, very pronounced. I'll pause the footage there. It's very, very pronounced. There's this sort of bowing, this outward bowing shape to the back of his left wrist. I'll change the colour there so it comes up in a nice highlighted yellow. There's a sort of arch shape, an outward, you might call it a convex shape. And if you look really carefully as we move frame by frame through this footage, you can see that we get a decent view. You see the top of the handle there. You can just see the top of his golf club is exposed. So that's a useful point to consider later on when I discuss how that's going to feel when I go outside. And a strong trait. That arching or curving of the back of the left wrist is very, very unusual at first if you're not used to it. It feels very, very strange and possibly even slightly stressful on the wrist. So it's something I want you to contemplate and have a go at. And again, I'm going to give you some encouragement, as I've promised you, when I go outside in a second. But it's very, very common among powerful players. It's something they do that sets them apart from people who maybe don't strike the ball as well. And it certainly assists them in moving the ball with a curve from right to left at times as well, for reasons that I'll explain. But it leads to more powerful shots, which is why it's, of course, favoured by stronger players. So it's a trait that you'll see in a lot of other players, not just Colin here. Now, one thing I'll just touch on, and I'll use another famous player. I'm going to use a guy for this as well, because I think it offers the best inspiration. I think what I'd like to do is just show you the position at the end of the backswing, and then we will jump outside. Okay, now this is a fellow by the name of Jon Rahm. He's one of the world's best players. He's obviously a previous Masters champion, a really, really good player. Now, you can already see that sort of sense that his wrist is beginning to bow. Now, you've got to bear in mind, look at the club pointing off to the left. We saw your golf club. If you go back and look at the footage of you swinging, the club ends up pointing more over there. All right. And that's because the angle in the back of John's wrist there, Jon Rahm's wrist, is that shape. It bows outwards instead of the cup shape that bows inwards when you take your backswing currently. Now, I've personal experience of this, and I want you to note the shape of the back of the left wrist at this point in the swing. It doesn't guarantee success or failure, by the way, but I think it's worthy of note when I do my demonstration in just a second. That angle can be quite a significant sort of watershed moment if you understand how we're potentially going to use that angle and how it's going to relate to helping you with your shots. It's certainly something that any self-respecting golfer is going to have a go at, but you might find it quite challenging at first. So don't expect it to be something that you necessarily find it's a quick fix. It might work right away. It's very possible that it might work right away, immediately, but it's more likely to take a little while. And then you can take a view. You can take a view on whether you like it or whether you don't like it. Anyway, let's get outside. So, Joy, these big slices, if you look at the end of your backswing, we reported, or we can observe this angle in the back of your left wrist here. If you bring that angle to the ball, and that angle there in the back of the left wrist is what I would call concave, or the industry calls it cupped. You can see the face of the club is no longer square with a leading edge going towards the sky at this point in this image. You can see adding that angle in there opens the face. So what we need to do is experiment, and I want you to let me know what happens when you try this. But you can see at the top of Jon Rahm's swing, and if I had any footage of Morikawa on there as well, you'd see these players favour that shape to the back of their left wrist. So it feels a little bit like your thumb, here we go, is going to be more on the side of the handle like that. So your thumb, if you can imagine, I'll show you this way, your thumb ends up feeling more like it's on the side. You can see the angle once again in the back of my left wrist feels like it's on the side. And the reason for that is if we start from a neutral position with the toe of the club looking at the sky, and I add this angle, so that outward angle, you remember what you just saw on that footage, that bowing wrist, you could see the top of the handle there. That shape wrist, which feels again quite weird at first, but that shape wrist, I sometimes call it revving the motorbike, brum brum, like that, right? I've never ridden, well, I might have ridden a motorbike once or twice, but it's not something I do regularly. But yeah, you get the idea, revving the motorbike like this. That actually closes the club face. Now, why am I so obsessed by this? Well, fundamentally, the club face is the biggest influencer of where your ball goes. Okay, so fundamentally, what you're describing to me, a slice shot, a shot that either starts straight and curves to the right, or more interestingly, starts to the right and curves further right, that's a sign that your club face is either open to the target, that's when the ball starts to the right, so the ball tends to start where your club face is pointing when you hit it. So as you hit the ball, if the club face is pointing way to the right, it's going to start right, and it's almost certainly going to curve further right. especially if you've got such a lovely neutral swing path. So when you take the club back, the shaft of the club and the club face, we can see here that little bit of an angle suggests that you haven't created that openness just yet. If you had, then you'd see the face of the club look more towards the sky, which you don't. But by the time you've finished your backswing, you've created a little bit of an angle there. And if you bring that back down in front of you, you can see that it opens the face. So we don't really want this way if we're a slicer. Now, speaking of which, talking about that forward swing of yours, if you imagine the club is constantly, or in an ideal world, the club face is constantly closing like this. And that's a good sign that it's accelerating as well. So at some point, it should outrun your hands. It should eventually start to look like there's an angle there, as you can see from this point of view. But when we watch your swing, if you watch it back on the video, we kind of, the hands and the club keep going forwards at the same rate, which is a sign you're probably harboring a bit too much tension in your left arm. Now you can either engineer that out and replace that closed feeling on the way forwards, or you can simply soften this arm. Now what you can try is, if you hold your forearm when you're practice swinging, if you hold your forearm like I'm doing now, so you take your other hand, your right hand, off the club and you hold your forearm, and you just gently let the club swing backwards and forwards like this, what you'll feel is the two major bones inside your arm, the radius and the ulnar, those bones should be free to rotate. So they behave in a very passive way, and that's why when it's done like this, it looks very effortless. So as I swing more aggressively, yes, sure, there's a feeling the club goes out and it pulls away from me. My arm is drawn out to its full length, but I don't want so much tension in that arm and my shoulder that I'm sort of holding on to it. All right, I'm going to let it go. Now, if you are clever, you'll slow motion me doing that. And what you'll see is, by the time my hands are still in front of my chest, just like yours, but with the rate of acceleration, the club will accelerate and I'll get a little bit of a kind of an L shape here. This angle here will be more pronounced in future than it is currently. And what that suggests is the club is allowed to travel further, and that means it's traveling faster. But the weird thing is it feels like less effort, even though the club's traveling faster. But the interesting thing is it's going to allow the club to rotate more, and that's going to increase your chances of not having the club face as open. It's not going to be as pointing as far right. So if you hold it open and you don't realize it, it looks a bit stiff in your follow through. If you hold the face open, that's the #1 cause of a slice. The face is open to the path. Worse still, it's open too much to the target. So we rev the motorbike, we arch our wrist like this, and we deliver the club forwards. And I want you to let me know what happens. What you should find is your club arrives more closed than before, so more pointing to the target, or possibly if you exaggerate it a lot when you're messing around with this, you'll have a tendency maybe to hit the ball straight to the left, and it might even curve further left. So that's when you know you've overdone it. You experiment with the amount of this angle that you include in your forward swing, and then I want you to feed back to me what you've noticed. All right, but be playful. The operative word in this situation is play. Mess around with that angle. So you go to the end of your backswing, you want to feel like your thumbs are more on this side of the handle, okay, sort of more on the side of the handle, instead of your thumbs underneath the shaft like that. You want to feel like they're on the side. There we go. So that feeling, you'll get that arch shape. You can watch yourself do this in a mirror, look back in the mirror and try and create that shape here. That basically loads you up, prepares you. It's an opportunity for you to prepare that angle and then deliver that angle to the ball. Okay, so you should really almost immediately get more shots that curve to, or start further left and curve further left. Now, on top of that, I'm going to send you a video, a separate link on our WhatsApp thread about club face awareness in general. These are your club faces, the back of your left hand, the palm of your right hand. So those linked to the club face, and you'll see me explaining about how you might experiment with feeling that the palm of your right hand is looking more towards the ground, or the back of your left hand is looking towards the ground, which is kind of what I was just describing. So if your club faces are open, all right, facing the sky as you come through, then you're going to hit it to the right. If your club faces are looking at the ground as you come through, you're going to hit it to the left. Somewhere in between those, when you harness the skill, is not holding the club open, because the club doesn't want to stay open on its own. You can hold it open, but it doesn't want to do it. When you swing a club, it wants to rotate. This club is free to rotate around the shaft, so it wants to do that. So you have to kind of let it, which is like giving away control to gain it. So when you swing, you kind of let the club freewheel, and that's what gives the swing its elegance and its gracefulness and its effortlessness. So those are two important tips for you. It's create some angle there and see if you can use it as a force for development, and also take the tension out of your forearm, your left arm particularly, and let that club freewheel a little bit more, as you've heard me describe it. All right, I think that's enough for now. You've got a bit to be going on with there. Let it digest a little bit, integrate that into your practice sessions, be playful, mess around with those angles, even though it feels quite weird at first. It used to feel really weird to me. I certainly don't exaggerate that angle at the top too much. My wrist is quite flat at the end of my backswing, but it varies. Sometimes I have to work on it. Sometimes I have to ask a little bit more of myself. But anyway, enough for now. Get practicing, and send me some pushback. Send me some messages about how you're getting on with it. And later in the month, you can send me some footage, perhaps after you've done some practice, and let me know. And we can see if those angles are a little bit more pronounced. All right. See you soon.